Hey there, Anita here. I hope y'all are staying safe in these difficult times and taking care of yourselves as best you can. So just real quick before we start the show, as you probably know, our nonprofit and programs like this podcast are sustained by the generous support of folks like you. If you have the capacity at the moment, please consider joining our Patreon community to help us keep sharing our feminist media analysis every week. You can do that by heading over to patreon.com/femfreak. They say no one likes feminists, not even liberals. And I was like, that's still true.
Yeah, I know.
That is still super true, y'all. Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Anita Sarkeesian, and I am joined today by two women who just want to be happy homemakers. Carolyn Pettit.
What? Who wrote this? Ridiculous.
And Ebony Adams.
I'm not good at it.
That's a lie.
No, it is very true.
Anyways.
I'm neither happy nor a homemaker.
That's true, but damn, can you cook?
Aw, thanks.
All right, well, this week, we are going to be talking about the new Hulu series, Mrs. America, which depicts the battle for and against the Equal Rights Amendment in the 1970s. All right, y'all, this is week 2645 of the Quarantine Report.
Mm-hmm.
How's your week 265,000?
I'm just freaking out about money, to be honest. I'm increasingly freaking out about money. I'm pulling in some money with stuff like doing some freelance writing and stuff, but the government seems to be having issues getting me my little stimulus check, like
Same.
a lot. And
because Trump has to have his name on them.
Right.
So it's delaying
Right.
checks so that you can get one stamped by Trump.
And, rent is barreling down at us in a few weeks. And so I'm, the
You're not
economic
paying your rent,
anxiety
are you?
aspect is just, I'm sorry?
You're not paying your rent, are you?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Oh, I can't go on like rent strike or whatever. I mean, I live in a corporate owned building that there's no opportunity for organization here.
Is this only in LA or was it in all of California? Because in LA, you can't get evicted for not paying rent.
Right. But I can't get evicted now, but I'd still owe the rent when eventually it's not like the rent. It's not like I can just not pay the rent,
I mean, it's literally that. You can down the road, whatever. We can talk about this later. But there's a lot of rent forgiveness, delays where there's a longer period of time to pay it back and that sort of thing to conserve money right now. So just something, I think I don't know how this is happening internationally, but there are various jurisdictions that are doing a lot to make it so that mortgages and rents are literally don't have to be paid right now because of how many people are unemployed and how difficult money is right now.
Well, we will see. I'll look into that more closely. It doesn't feel like I have much leeway in that regard, but I might.
So that's such a stressful position to be in. So let's hire Carolyn to write things. She's really good at it.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm grateful for the opportunities I've been given to do some freelance work, but yeah, it's still scary times.
Super real.
Mm-hmm.
Ebony, what are you cooking?
I'm not cooking nothing right now. I'm cooking up the will to stay awake and not take nap number 2 after this is over. But I think I might have, lost the battle before it even began.
I mean, I don't know why you're trying to fight that urge because
me either. It's a cloudy day in LA, and it's a Saturday, so. I mean, although what day is it? Who knows, really? If you could tell me it's Wednesday at 7 a.m. and I wouldn't be able to argue with you.
True. Well, we got Ebony to watch a thing after our last time of saying that we weren't going to watch. She didn't want to watch anything. And oh boy, did we watch something.
Yeah, we did.
This week's topic is about Mrs. America, which stars Cate Blanchett as Phyllis Schlafly. as conservative writer and politician who in the 1970s led the conservative opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment. This was, for those of you who don't know, the Equal Rights Amendment was to provide legal equality for all people regardless of gender. Her tactics included arguing that traditional roles of marriage and motherhood were good for women and would be jeopardized by movements towards equality, and fear-mongering about things like women getting drafted into military service and, oh my God, even unisex bathrooms? What a nightmare. The show also depicts the burgeoning feminist movement of the time as figures including Gloria Steinem, Betty Friedan, Shirley Chisholm, Bella Abzug, which I think a lot of people aren't familiar with, and other organizers who strategize and often fiercely disagree about the best way to advance the cause of women's liberation. This show is a limited series. It has 10 episodes total, and we have watched the first 3 that are currently out at the moment. So we will be talking about that. This is a pretty star-studded cast in a lot of ways. There's some really big, like, impressive players here. The show, I gotta be honest with y'all. Like, I didn't want to watch this, and it feels weird. I didn't either. It feels weird to say that as like people who care about feminism,
right?
Yeah, and I don't know if maybe y'all can articulate that better, since Ebony, you clearly agree with me. But like, one, I'm familiar with Phyllis Schlafly.
Two L's.
Yeah, 2 L's.
Before the A and after the F.
Yeah.
Oh my God. She's a fucking nightmare. She's horrific. Or she was. She's not alive anymore. She caused incredible damage to the feminist movement. They made her seem slightly less racist than she actually is in the show. And it seemed like the show was about her, but in a lot of ways. And the title, Mrs. America, especially in contrast to the fact that Gloria Steinem and others created Ms. Magazine to specifically talk about these issues. So like, it just felt very centered on an anti-feminist in a way that I'm like, I don't need to watch the like recreation of this horrible woman. Like I had issues with that.
So yeah, I wasn't that interested in it because I was like you, I am, familiar with some of the bigger figures who were in this show. And I was from the onset of hearing about it, I was like, I'm not quite sure who this show is for, other than perhaps the actors and creators. Like, we know that the show is going to like just take home bucket loads of Emmy nominations, if not wins, when the time comes around for it. Right. And I will say from the outset, the show, like, Cate Blanchett acts her ass off in this thing, like there are some incredible performances. And I do think we only watched 3 episodes, but I think some of the directing in this is really quite good. But in terms of like the audience, I just don't quite know who it's for, or at least I didn't. And then as I got like halfway through the first episode, I was like, oh, this is for those people who are really into empowerment feminism. Like, this is the sort of end result. This is the kind of art you get when you celebrate the notion of the girl boss as an end, unto itself, as if the notion of a woman achieving power or having some sort of influence, or even just, revealing that she's got more than 2 brain cells to rub together is itself laudatory. And I was like, miss me with this shit. All right, we got 3 episodes here of all the like women in the 70s, talking about women's rights, and gay rights and abortion rights. Like, these are the people you're going to structure this show around? Fuck off. Like, give me the Combahee River Collective. Like, this is not the show for me. And you can miss me with this attempt to like add Shirley Chisholm in, just like as an afterthought. Give me a fucking break. This show should have been about her.
Well, I will say I knew going into this conversation that I was in the minority. I like it very much. I think that the portrayal we are getting of Schlafly is fascinating because it is constantly revealing her hypocrisy. It is constantly revealing how she is this calculating, ambitious figure who doesn't herself want to be limited by the traditional notions of what a woman can be. And so what within patriarchy, and particularly within the structures of the Republican Party at that time, although obviously the Democratic Party, I'm not saying the Democratic Party was any better in this regard, but like she's very much in this position. You know, her husband only supported her campaign because he thought she would lose. You know, he imposes sex upon her when she doesn't want it. Like I read, you know, the Vanity Fair review observes that you know, nobody needs the women's liberation movement more than Phyllis Schlafly. And yet, like, because she is so blinded by years of internalizing patriarchy, perhaps, and by her own ambition, the only opportunity she sees really to assert power for herself is through selling out her own gender. And I just think the show puts that hypocrisy in your face, like, over and over again, and in such a way that, and I just think the way Cate Blanchett portrays this process she has of kind of almost like actively having to maintain this facade, this mask of like the kind of benevolent, like cruelty almost, or like this cold, this like weird mixture of like ruthless warmth, maybe. Like it's hard to find like that mask, that facade of like womanly, you know, traditional warmth and good grace that's also gonna like destroy you. Like, I don't know. I think that I find the way that it juxtaposes that with the lives of these feminists fascinating, you know, and I think that, and to me, you know, like there's a moment where Schlafly says, "Oh yeah, those feminists, they're no fun," or like they don't have any fun, and then cut to like this party at the Guggenheim for the launch of Ms. Magazine, where people are having way more fun than we ever see the kind of the housewives, I think, in Schlafly's circles having. So I don't know. Like I'm not as opposed to its focus on Schlafly as I think both of you are, because I feel like it's pretty clear in its portrayal of her as this kind of hypocrite, and, you know, this woman who's just fear-mongering and grabbing what power she can for herself in a system that is completely opposed to her gender, and she's like fueling that.
So yeah, I guess I don't want to deny like the autonomy, you know, or the intelligence of any viewer. And I certainly see what you're getting at, Carol. Like, I don't think that the show is necessarily positioning Schlafly, you know, uncritically. But my problem with it is that the framing of the show itself positions her as our POV character. And so by the time the end of the first episode rolls around, we have already invested so much empathy in this woman who espouses such horrific ideals. So by the time you get to episodes 2 and 3, where we start to see more of the cracks and what it costs her, that by that point, we still, I mean, I don't want to suggest that she's like the hero, but in a way she sort of is the hero of the show. I think that the way the show frames her as being like singular and, you know, as you say, like sort of, you know, ruthless and single-minded and always playing like, you know, 5D chess, as opposed to the kind of, you know, like reactive and, you know, emotional and combative, you know, organizing of Bella and Gloria and Betty, I think, you know, just sort of slots into this kind of trope where it's like, okay, you know, how much of this stuff does she really believe herself? The main thing is like, she's been denied the opportunity to really exercise her full range as a human being. And so, yeah, maybe she, you know, vocalized some horrific positions, but I don't know. I just feel like the show, there's a real danger in, you know, having the show be called Mrs. America, suggesting that it's going to be kind of an anthology in a way, such that like the episode titles start with 1 is Phyllis, and then 2 is Gloria, and then 3 is Shirley. But episode 2 is not really about Gloria Steinem. It's still primarily about Phyllis. Episode 3 is not really about Shirley Chisholm. We get some Shirley Chisholm in it, but it both starts and ends with Phyllis Schlafly. Like, I feel like, you know, this show is, it's so attracted to the particular kind of like ruthless quest for power that she represents that for me felt kind of dangerous, but also like tired in a way.
Mm.
And like I said, I thought the show was incredibly well done. Like it was not hard to watch these episodes as a show.
I completely agree with Ebony on this. I think that
I know you do.
I just want to soak in that moment, by the way.
What?
I want to soak in that moment. You say I completely agree with me.
It happens often.
It's anyway, go ahead.
So I agree in that my problem with it is that it is a show about Phyllis Schlafly completely, and that Cate Blanchett plays her so fucking amazingly and is so like by far the strongest performance on the show. And I'm not trying to downplay anyone else, but the way that they center her, like the writers centered Phyllis, they centered her combating the feminist movement. It's not the feminist movement that we're talking about. And then you see all of the different bad actors that are coming to try to end it. Like the show also frames it as if like the ERA was this easy thing and it was going to go and all these men were on board until Phyllis came by. And so I struggle with that framing. And I also can't help but think that it's the only way that the show was going to get made. Because I'm telling you, it is still incredibly hard to make explicitly feminist oriented media. It's happening because it's something that is so far away and most of these people are not alive anymore. It feels disconnected from our current lives in a lot of ways. Although I will argue that it isn't, but I think that that's part of the people who fund this think. And also, the other piece of it is that the ERA hasn't been fucking passed. Like, It is not passed today in this year, 2020. So, like, it is a disservice to all of the work that has been done since then and since that time to focus on the failure of it as opposed to rising up the importance of it to me. Like, it feels like a bullshit Hollywood framing of this very important moment. And now I'm not trying to say that it's not watchable. And I'm not trying to say that like they're not, shaping these other characters in ways that show the tension in the feminist movement that I think is really important. It's just they're not as dynamic and they're not as central.
Yeah, one of the things that I probably will watch more episodes. I don't know that I will wind up finishing the series, but I would be surprised if I do. But one of the things that the show sort of waves its hand towards, but really does make the audience, connect the dots with, is the role of race in the universe that both Phyllis and, her sister-in-law occupy. Also, I do hope we talk about Jeannie Triplehorn because I love Jeannie Triplehorn so much. But I'm thinking not specifically about Shirley Chisholm here, but about the many, many servants that we see in the backgrounds of shots, both at Phyllis's home and in the spaces wherein her group and, her supporters live and work, right? So whether it's hotels or whether it's these other homes. And so as these women are talking about the, like the protections that need to be kept in place for housewives and for the women who just want to take care of their children, it is wonderful to see the Black women who are actually doing the work of making sure that they can take these meetings, and not have to deal with their children or, provide food for the families. But we don't really get to see those women. Like there are few anyway, like lingering shots. We don't learn any of their names. And so as like a meta commentary, it works, but it also doesn't work because you're like, okay, when are we going to unpack this? Because the opposition that we see between, Phyllis in the Stop ERA movement, and then the feminist movement, as led by Betty and Gloria and Bella, rarely introduces the topic of race. And when it does, it's solely through Shirley Chisholm. But class isn't really discussed. Are we going to get more of that? That's a huge part of it. The point I'm trying to make is so many more people were part and parcel of like the grassroots organizing in this period. And I get that Phyllis Schlafly is a fascinating character, but at what point do we acknowledge all of the other women, all of the other people who were doing this work whose lives were material affected by this work. We get people talking about them, but we rarely get talking.
Well, I think
hear them talking for themselves.
I mean, that argument could be made. I don't think you're wrong. I just think that like when you construct a story, you have to make choices about how many voices you get in the story. So part of the problem is that they decided to tell a story about passing the ERA, right? Like they chose that this is the tension and these are the actors that they're going, like the players that they're going to use in this space, as opposed to any other facet of the feminist movement or any other struggles of it, right? Because I'm thinking about like, Selma, for example, like the choices that are made in terms of whose voices get to be heard in the civil rights movement was a creative choice by the creators of that as well. Right. So I don't know. I just wanted to put that out there of like, there are choices that need to be made and we can judge people for those choices, but we can't.
And that's precisely what I'm doing. That's what I'm saying. That it is a choice. It is a choice. And I think it is a choice that needs to be questioned, that you cannot suggest, as this show largely does, that the feminist movement or the anti-feminist movement were movements largely made up of white middle-class women, and to only occasionally, turn the lens towards people of other races or of other classes, like it is vital to the understanding of what, like the Stop ERA was trying to do, that these women, by and large, white middle-class women, had an entire Black servant class that allowed them to, express an autonomy and a privilege that was not accorded to others, like I think that's, to me, it seems like, a missing element. And yeah, I mean, you put together a show and you're like, all right, it's on broadcast TV with commercials. We got, 52 minutes or whatever. But why is it that in these stories about like important historical epochs, it's like, okay, well, we're going to constantly always have space for whiteness, but we're just, sorry, if it was another show or we had more time, we would let other people speak, but we just don't have the time.
Well, and if those topics come up, they're coming up after 3 episodes in. Right. Like that's the other thing is we don't know if that will be addressed other than the subtle like wink and nod that they've done so far. But like 3 episodes in, it's pretty far in to be like, and then this is important to us.
Yeah, I am. No, that's so I'm so I don't know about this show. On the one hand, I will never put down a show that stars Margot Martindale.
Dude, she is so she's the best. System. She is the best casting for Bella Abzar. I was just like, oh yeah, this is
so good, right?
so good. Yeah,
like there's really no one in this that I don't think is great. As I said, I think Cate Blanchett just like far and away. I
don't know about
Herculean rookie.
Rose Byrne as Gloria Steinem is growing on me. But I didn't like it at first. Like I thought the first times we were introduced to her, she seemed a little ditzier than Gloria actually is. And I think she, as the episodes went on, became less that. So I was kind of pulling back my judgment of it because I think she just needed a minute to get into that character, I guess.
Yeah.
And also, how hard is it to play someone who's alive still?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm like, what does Gloria think of this? Like, I actually Googled to see if she'd made any statements about it because like, I'm so curious how she interprets this show.
Well, and I have not seen it yet, but there was the documentary that came out of Sundance this year, The Glorias, that's all about Gloria Steinem. And maybe, we can talk about it on an upcoming episode because in that instance, they have different actors playing Gloria at different points in her life. And you do wonder, like, how do you and a director make the decision whether to go for like impersonation, in your characterization or trying to build something new and trying to find like some other just sort of like the heart of the character. Because I don't think like, Uzo Aduba is not doing Shirley Chisholm in this role. She's doing something else. Like she's trying to inhabit, who Shirley was, but she's not doing like kind of a note for note, SNL impersonation of her. And I do think Rose Byrne's Gloria Steinem did feel a little flat to me, but I agree. It does get better over the course of those latter 2 episodes we saw.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I want to go back to Jean Triplehorn, who Ebony mentioned also, like, who plays, so Jean Triplehorn plays Phyllis Schlafly's sister. And there's, there's what I think is a great scene where Phyllis is talking. She's giving a speech to an organized group of women, including her sister. And she's essentially saying that women who cannot succeed within the system as it exists at that time, it's a personal failing for them, right? And she characterizes Gloria Steinem as a miserable woman who, quote, wants a constitutional cure for her personal problems. But you have in Jean Triplehorn's character this woman who has like never been married, and was like looked over apparently by all the men who like, and you see this like look dawning on her face during that talk of like, oh wait, I am a woman for whom this system absolutely does not work. And I don't know how far the character, because we haven't spent much more time with the character since then, so I don't know how far she allows that thought process to go in her mind. But it's clear that what we, I think the viewers are seeing is this dawning realization on her part that, almost like, I am one of them. Like I'm part of the opposition. I'm part of the ERA, like the women who need the ERA and want the ERA. Like for whom this whole rigid system doesn't work. And for me, that was just such a powerful moment because I have felt similar things so often in my life of like, patriarchy does not, it doesn't work for any woman. It oppresses every woman, but some women find ways to make themselves work within it more than other women can or do. And, so anyway, like I really, there was just something about that particular scene where I really appreciated what we were seeing happen on Jean Triplehorn's face. Because I was like, yeah,
that follow-up,
that's right.
And the follow-up where she like digs at her sister being like, yeah, basically, in a very passive aggressive way being like, yeah, you didn't stop it from being passed. These other people did, right? Like that follow-up of the like very passive aggressive, we have to be polite to each other dig.
Right.
That followed from that moment, which I also agree was very powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I loved how we saw that play out on Jean Triplehorn's face. I'm blanking on her character's name. Was it Anne? I can't remember. But I also love, and again, I'm not going to talk shit about a show that stars Sarah Paulson. Sarah Paulson in this, when she and Phyllis decide that she should go confront two of the racist white women who have been speaking at their hotel conference, because Phyllis, of course, doesn't want to use any of her political, and powerful currency, and potentially offend someone who might be someone that she can use in future. So she presses this, this duty she doesn't want to do, and in reality doesn't really believe in. Like, the problem is not that this woman is racist. The problem is that she's vocally racist, in a way that is not expressed in the kind of civil terms. It doesn't have that veneer of dignity over it that would allow it to be spoken. It is instead the sort of like stereotypical crude Southern style racism, which is another thing that I, have a problem with in this show. But so Sarah Paulson's character goes over to the table, Phyllis is just sort of, in the background smiling beatifically, and allows Sarah Paulson to take all of the heat from these women, and then completely, sort of betrays her friend in the moment when it comes down to it. She kowtows to these forces who might endanger her nascent movement, right? And so to look at Sarah Paulson to be like, well, I'm just another coin that she will, deploy as she sees fit. Like, those moments are so good, like Sarah Paulson, Jean Triplehorn, and those moments where they're reacting, when they're realizing what a master manipulator Phyllis is, and recognizing that they are not immune to being, moved about on the chessboard like so many pieces. Those are just fantastic.
And I really think, I think the way the show is trying at least to be kind of clear-headed about like strategy and stuff on both sides is pretty fascinating. Like I think so. Bella Abzug, the sort of other side of this battle, is very much this like political strategist, probably, considers herself kind of quote unquote realistic about what needs to be done to advance the larger cause of women's liberation. And so you have these moments, like there's one moment where, she talks to Gloria about kind of needing a quote unquote pretty face for something. Mm-hmm. And so it's just this interesting thing where even within the movement to liberate women, there still has to be the recognition that those things still have currency and power, and you still sometimes do need like appearance and like attractiveness and things to get a message across. And how Gloria is constantly having to, because the money man or whatever for Ms. Magazine is a man and is like kind of scuzzy. Like she, even within like her own magazine and movement, is constantly having to like navigate and negotiate these things, even in the midst of this larger effort to dismantle these larger systems. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know. I just find that stuff fascinating. And actually, Anita, you said that maybe this feels kind of disconnected from our lives right now. But if anything, I felt.
I don't actually think it does, but sorry, please continue.
Because it's like 50 years in the past, it may sort of seem that way. But yeah, I felt like, when we get into the strategic conversations around Shirley, like they in some ways at least are somewhat strategically at least similar to, I think, conversations that were and debates that we're still having now about like, well, what is the better move? Like, do we throw our support behind this figure who is like this tremendous compromise and who isn't going to really represent what we want or need? Or do we hold out and like force them to recognize that they can't win without us? But what do we sacrifice if we do that? Like, all these, I just find all that stuff, to me, I felt very much like watching this, like, oh, like this is the ongoing story in which, in some ways, we are all still caught up. Like this is, mm-hmm. I could feel the straight line between
in
what
so
it was
many
depicting
ways
and what's happening right now, right?
In so many ways, like politically, like you said, in terms of like candidacy, it's the same fucking story again and again. Mm-hmm. And then also, like there was a line between Phyllis and her husband where they say no one likes feminists, not even liberals. And I was mm-hmm. like, that's still true.
Yeah, I know.
That is still super true, y'all. And I feel like that might be, again, Ebony, I think you're so on point, is like, who's the fucking audience for this show? Like, I'm so confused about, is it people who are learning about this for the first time? Is it people who just want to like have a Mad Men style drama, which one of the, mm-hmm. There is a Mad Men pedigree that made the show. I forget the relationship
Davi, Davi Waller, didn't she also do *Halt and Catch Fire*? She
has worked probably. She worked on both Mad Men and *Halt and Catch Fire* as a producer and writer in some mm-hmm. capacity. Yes.
But I was just thinking about how, like, there's a perspective that those of us who are sort of educated about the history of feminism have in going into this that is really hard for me to. Like, I keep being like, what does this feel like to someone who doesn't know these people? Like, there are, for a lot of people, the only person they've ever heard of is Gloria Steinem. They don't know any of these other I keep saying actors, but I mean the people, right? That they're based on. And that, like, what does it mean to be introduced to Shirley Chisholm for the first time, or Phyllis Schlafly, or Bella Abzug? Like, what is it? Are they just like interesting figures from history that you're like, oh, cool, I didn't know about this? Like, I don't know what that feeling is. Cause to me, I'm like, well, it's so personal in a lot of ways in terms of how, like, what happened after this period of time in American politics, in American feminism, right? How it just, like, the feminist movement just fell apart and mm-hmm. got taken over by this idea of, like, we're already equal, so we don't need to actually keep fighting. And now we're in a place where, they're literally fighting for abortion rights. We're, like, watching a dramatization of the fight to get abortion rights in place and talked about on a mainstream stage. And we're right now, literally lawmakers, instead of being like, hey, COVID and coronavirus is literally going to kill people, they stopped to make sure that people couldn't get abortions, right? Like, in this moment in time that they weren't mandatory or essential for people this many years later. So there's just a little bit of like, yeah, it's cool to see where this comes from. I also am like, well, how does this inspire or engage people today? Like, is this show going to inspire people to take up the mantle of fighting for the ERA again? which is a fight that people are still having. It's just not as big as it was, right? So, I feel like we're in this place where it's like, we still can't even wrap our heads around a female president. Like, we literally still cannot even do that at this point. That let alone talking about how the entire goddamn system is flawed, which is why that statement of no one likes feminists, not even liberals, I was like, that's actually one of the deepest things that this show fucking said, because it's so goddamn real. And the other stuff that really got me is that in episode 3, Shirley Chisholm is, I think there was a lot of stuff around her character that's interesting, around like, is she running as a Black person or as a woman, and that those two things can't be together, right? They have to be constantly polarized, and like, she can't get these communities to understand that this is this larger fight, and And she says like, with such emotion that power concedes nothing. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's it. Like, that is this battle. It is a battle of power. And I think we forget that. I think we're constantly forgetting about the core of like the feminist movement is about who holds power and who doesn't.
Yeah, I guess that's partially why, or primarily why, I wanted the lens. I wanted the narrative lens to just back up just a bit, so that we could get more of the people who don't get much screen time. So I love Melanie Lynskey, absolutely love her. But the screen time that is devoted to her character and her conflicts with Sarah Paulson's character, I'm like, we couldn't have even like one moment of like one of the maids in the background rolling their eyes at, these white women coffee klatches or whatever, like just something, could we have some time with like Shirley Chisholm and Flo Kennedy, played by Niecy Nash, another favorite, like just the two of them. There was never a space, for anything other than these two very like, IKEA versions of what feminism and anti-feminism.
Well, I'll say also, like, there's no reason for us to give a shit about Gloria Steinem in this show. Like, and I'm not saying that she, like, I think it's important that they're talking about the obsession with Gloria's physique and like the way that she looks, and that was part of why she got propelled and she was constantly asked to be on stage and the representative of the feminist movement, and also because she was fucking smart and she could like, say smart, but like, I don't feel like the episode about Gloria Steinem really gave you the same level of depth and nuance as it did about Phyllis. And same with Shirley.
No, it doesn't.
We don't know why Shirley's running, other than one passing comment about how she used to beat up people who left her. Like, we don't get that kind of depth with these characters. I do want to point out one thing, though, is there are 1.5 million articles right now if you want to go and look up like what's real and what's not in the show. One of the scenes with Gloria Steinem where you see that she's about to have an abortion, that actually is real, and it's an interesting moment because in her book On the Road, or My Life on the Road, it's dedicated to the doctor who gave her that abortion. And he said, don't tell anyone about me and go live your best life, or like go do what you want to do with your life. And so she waited to talk about that until he actually passed. And so it was like a nice inclusion there, but also that scene didn't really, like, I don't know, man. Like I'm just really frustrated with like, they're making the feminist side of the movement less humanized in a lot of ways. Like they're trying to show that it's messy and it's not always organized and not everyone agrees with everyone. And I think that that's really important and good to acknowledge, because that's exactly how our movements are today. But like the anti-feminist side is about this really dynamic, interesting anti-hero figure. And I just, I'm sort of repeating myself now, but
you know what? I do hope we get more of in later episodes, because we know now that like, Phyllis is the sort of sun around which, all of the rest of these planetary figures are going to orbit. But the sense that her relationship with her parents, her father, who I'm assuming has died, her mother, who is coming to live with them. But, there's a scene where Phyllis is in her mother's home and she's looking at, this kind of shabby dwelling that her mother does not have the ability or perhaps the desire or the resources to keep up with. And she's looking at all of the unpaid bills that her mother has stacked up. And, there's this very tense conversation where her mother tries to say, like, all the things that your father did, one thing he was not is a good provider. And Phyllis just cannot hear this, right? But you do get the sense that, like, part of why it is, like, Phyllis has to hold on to the domestic stability that she has carved out with her husband. Her insistence, her death grip on it is because she will not ever allow herself to be in the position that her mother is in. That there is, there's a need for security and protection that is so personal that I do hope that we see that fleshed out a bit more. There's also the scene where Phyllis is having the conversation with, oh God, I'm blanking on which congressperson it was now. No, it was with Barry Goldwater. And they're talking about, like, the SALT talks, right? And they dismiss the secretary and say, like, we don't want this to be on the record, but then ultimately ask Phyllis to take notes, and Margaret will give you a notepad. And the secretary says, yes, like, says, like, here you go, Miss Schlafly. And she's like, it's Mrs. And that the way, like, the venom with which she says that is because that is one of her few sources of power in that space in which it has been stripped from her, right? Like, her worth in that moment is as a tool for these other men to, like, sort of bounce ideas around, regardless of the fact that she probably knows more than they do about the issue they're talking about. But, like, her only safety in that moment is that she is a safely married woman. And so she occupies a certain position in society. Like, I think there are things like that were absolutely brilliant,
like,
in the show.
Yeah, similarly effective for me is this moment when I forget, Phyllis brings, like, cookies or something somewhere, and a man says, like, oh, these are delicious. Have you ever thought about opening a baking business?
Oh, shit.
Yes.
And,
that was so
like,
good.
the way that she says, no, I've never thought about it. Like, it's just to me, it's just that fascinating moment of, like, again, to me, like, the hypocrisy of, like, she is leading this grassroots movement, selling to America or reinforcing, doubling down on the idea that women are meant to be homemakers, bakers, mothers, all these kinds of things. And yet when someone sizes her up wrong and, like, she's, like, very, like, no, you have me all wrong. Like, I don't know. I just find that I mean, I know I really do understand all the problems with centering her in terms of, like, who we're devoting our time to, our sympathy, potentially our sympathy or empathy to, the power of the narrative, like, where it goes when we focus on a character like her. But as a viewer, I do find that hypocrisy and the way that it's explored in this story just delicious in moments like that. Yeah. I just find it so fascinating.
And I will give you, like, I agree with that, Carolyn. Like, I'm appreciative that the show is interjecting those pretty regularly, in terms of, like, undermining her. Like, she's clearly a villain, right? Like, she's clearly a bad person in this, even if she is being humanized in that process. And there is something narratively that's really interesting. I think it's hard for me because of how the actual damage of this person in the world has caused, right? It's hard for me in terms of, like, the state that we're in currently, not because of her, but because of this mentality that still very much exists, right? Like, that the thing that you shared with us in Slack about, like, the streaming that's, like, Women for Trump is, like, like, these events that are happening.
The Empower Hour, it's called. Yeah. Like, the Women for Trump Empower Hour or something like that. It's just amazing.
So I just like, as a narrative device of having this really complicated, or having this character who is a very bad character, but showing the hypocrisy and the nuance, I think is wonderful for storytelling. I just can't remove it from like the very real reality that it's based on and all of the repercussions of who this person was in life, I guess. So, oh boy. I'm going to keep watching the show. I'm really curious about like what they do with it and where it goes. I mean, we know that the ERA is not going to get passed, and we know that Roe v. Wade is. So we'll see how they pull all of those strings and all that tension and all of these different characters that come to play. I don't know. Like I want these people to be made complex, but something like Betty Friedan, like there is it's well documented that Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan didn't get along very well for various reasons, but like the book that Betty wrote was really important for like, it was, you can say what you want about it and how it's aged and all of that shit, but like it was extremely important. And so it's this interesting moment of like, did the show well enough address that fact while undermining her in the moment 10 years later that they're in, Yeah,
I do feel like Betty Friedan is kind of ill-served by this, and that she exists primarily as kind of a caricature. I know what you're going to say, but I'm saying like, if you're going to give Phyllis Schlafly the space to be ridiculous, but also be humanized, then I think, you could construct a figure like, or you could give Betty Friedan some space to like also be ridiculous, but also be, a ridiculous human. And so, no shade to Tracy Ullman, who I love, but I did just feel like,
yeah. So the next episode is titled Betty. So we know that we're going to get.
Yeah. So what? We'll get 2 minutes of her.
No, right. I mean, I'm not saying. I'm just saying. We could. It could be okay, but it could not be okay. So, we don't know.
Yeah, and it looks like they're doing every episode based on a character, on a figure for at least for the beginning. I'm assuming they're going to do that.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I mean, so the episode after Betty is called Phyllis and Fred and Brenda and Mark. So we're going to get at least more of the Schlafly family dynamics.
Cool.
And then Jill, Bella, Houston, and Reagan.
Wow.
Great.
Wow.
Yeah. So some idea where we're going.
I will say too, I do want to just acknowledge that like, there is no version of this show that we're not going to be critical of. So like, it's really hard to be the creators and the writers of this particular show about this particular topic. And that doesn't mean that our criticisms aren't valid or that like, I think there's value to this show existing. And we'll see how it goes. But I do want to just acknowledge that like,
yeah.
Totally. I know the feeling. I know that there's this sentiment that like, oh, you'll never be happy with anything. And I'm like, yeah, this is a hard thing to do. Like, it's a hard thing to get right. Or whatever that means.
And it is valuable critique to acknowledge that, like, and I think both you and Ebony sort of said this in different ways, that like, we talk about power. Well, there's power in who a show like this chooses to focus on and who it chooses to like build its narrative around. And so even if it is in some ways undermining Phyllis Schlafly at times, even if it is sometimes kind of portraying her in a negative light, like we can still acknowledge that like by just even making her a central figure and giving her ideas this airtime, even if it does do so in a way that tries to be even-handed or show the other side or whatever you want to say, like there is that is a meaningful choice that has power behind it, because this is a mass media product that is going to be seen by millions, and so that those things matter. And like, what would it have been if it had focused more on grassroots feminists, on Black women, on people whose names we don't already know, et cetera, et cetera. Like, we can always ask those questions and push for media to do more of that more often.
Yep.
I mean, if power concedes nothing, this is a show about power, but maybe in some ways it's reinforcing existing power structures by having the narrative structure that it does.
Yeah. All right. Well,
just before we go, I would like to say that I binged the 3 episodes this morning and then immediately took a nap. And you know, when you're kind of half in, half out of sleep and you think of something and you're like, oh, this is genius. I got to tell people about it. And then you wake up and it's actually absolutely Boogle House. The thing that I thought as I was falling asleep after binging these 3 episodes was, this is like a mirror universe Parks and Rec if Leslie Knope was evil and it was from Eagleton. So that, ladies and gentlemen, and people all over the world, is the kind of brain power that I had left available to me after watching. Yeah.
Incredible. Mm-hmm. I don't know how you binged this. That feels brutal.
I wasn't going to spread it out over several nights. I just wanted to, do it. And like I said, it's very easy to watch, like these are not amateurs making this show. So
it's very professionally done. All right. On that note, we'll be right back with our weekly freakouts. Hey friends, the Games and Online Harassment Hotline is launching a new live show called Good Tips for Hard Times. We're going to talk to experts about all sorts of topics, from how to handle anxiety in this difficult moment, to increased anti-Asian racism, to being safer online. Tune in every Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific Time at twitch.tv/FemFreak. And you can learn more if you follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Games Hotline. Hope to see you there. Now it's time to talk about what's been thrilling us, moving us, upsetting us, or infuriating us this past week, aside from the show that we just spent an hour talking about. Carolyn, you want to get us started?
Sure. I admit I haven't had much emotional or intellectual bandwidth for reading or watching or playing things lately. I've felt a little overwhelmed by everything. So instead, I'm going to freak out quite literally about a specific aspect of the state of the world currently. And I think our refrain this episode already of like the power concedes nothing ties in nicely with this, because what I'm particularly horrified by right now is, and I know that it's weird that the American right can still ever do anything that surprises me, but the COVID-19 is proving that they are still very much capable of doing things that surprise me, is like the ghoulish way in which you have these figures like Dr. Oz and Dr. Phil, going on, the media, going on the TV news and stuff. And it's not just them, it's a whole concerted effort, but to basically sell us this idea that that the economy has to get up and running basically as soon as possible, and that any consequences in terms of like loss of life that may amount from that 2-3% mortality rate, like really, like what's the big deal? When our way of life, our American freedom, our ability to go eat at Fuddruckers is being threatened or is being taken away from us. Because it is purely like, it's infuriating and horrifying on so many levels, but I guess like most alarming to me is the idea of Americans, particularly poor working class Americans, being angry at the sort of the shutdown, the quarantine, conditions that we're living in, which are in place and necessary to save our lives, like feeling like that's the tyranny, and rather than being angry at where they should be angry, and that is at the federal government's egregiously insufficient response to helping people weather this storm. A one-time $1,200 check if you get it, if you qualify, if you get it at all. From the richest country in the history of the world. But this is all power working to protect and insulate itself and to pull the wool over people's eyes and to get us to not be rioting or revolting against the systems of power that oppress us. Which is where our anger should be directed right now.
It's such a whole new level of outrage that, like Carolyn, you're saying that I didn't think was possible. just the total incompetency and just egregious, like it is. Violence isn't the word I'm looking for, but it is just so irresponsible is too subtle of a word. Like I don't even know how to articulate how horrifying Trump and all of these people are being. And watching those protests of people like side by side demanding to go back to work.
But I wonder if those people at the protests, what percentage of them are people like working people who want to go back to work, and what percentage of them are wealthier people wanting other people to go back to work for them? And I think that's a very important distinction. And I suspect it's mostly the latter. It's mostly people who want to go get their hair done or want to buy the feed at the feed store that they need for their second cottage or whatever, and not the people who actually are, not the working people whose lives would mostly be on the line if the lockdown were lifted, say, today, tomorrow.
Yeah.
And just the hypocrisy of it too. Remember what a massive, not even kerfuffle, but a massive to-do was made about supposed quote unquote death panels under Obama or whatever, or 9/11, the death toll of that, obviously tragic and horrific day. And now literally more people than died in 9/11 are dying per day right now of COVID-19. But the right is whatever. It's it's a minuscule, it's pure hypocrisy, and it's all about maintaining economic and political power.
Because power concedes nothing. Mm. Oh boy. Ebony, you want to follow that up?
I know, I should. So I want to freak out about a show on IFC called Year of the Rabbit. It is a British sitcom. There are 6 episodes. I've only seen one of the episodes, but it is so funny and so dumb. Oh my God. So it stars Matt Berry, Freddie Fox, and Susan Wokoma. And Matt Berry, if you know of him, it's going to be for things like Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. He played Sanchez, or Toast of London. But he's just this, I don't even know how to explain. He's like a 30 pounds of butter in a 20-pound bag. He just looks very stocky and dense. And it's this very particular kind of look. He's got this amazing bass voice and just a fantastic physical comedian and performative in this way that is just a delight to watch. The story is set in Victorian London, and it's about this kind of dissolute police inspector and then his 2 compatriots and peers on the police force, including Susan Wokoma, who is a Black woman, who is the police chief's adopted daughter. It's silly. It's ludicrous. There's nothing serious about it. And it was just a confectionery delight. So Year of the Rabbit, you can watch episodes on IFC. There's like I said, there's 6 episodes, so it'll take you 2.5 hours to get through. So it's perfect.
Nice. I'm going to give us 2 very short freakouts. One is Fiona Apple dropped a new album, which fucking love her so much. And the new album is called Fetch the Bolt Cutters, and it's really good. If you like Fiona Apple, it's just more of her being poetically hating men, which is just a dream. It's intense and it's great and it's wonderful, and I highly recommend it. My second short freakout is that I continue to hate watch Devs, which we had talked about before we took our little hiatus. And the show is fucking horrible and I fucking hate it. And the finale, which I was like, okay, let's just see how they wrap it up, was fucking stupid. So there you go. I hated that show. I didn't think it could get worse. It totally did. I mean, I did get worse. I don't know why I think it couldn't. Anyways, if you liked it, I'm sorry that we have very different opinions and that yours is wrong. All right. Yeah, I hated it so much. Y'all like it so much. It was It was quite the experience. I feel a little bit like I should have live streamed watching it because there was so much commentary that happened throughout every viewing of this show. But better that you all weren't subjected to that. Submit your own freak out at feministfrequency.com/freakout. FREQOUT. Thanks so much for listening to Feminist Frequency Radio. Stay tuned for the Freakin' After Party, only available to backers of this podcast, which you can do by heading over to patreon.com/femfreak. Follow us on iTunes, subscribe to us, rate, review us. Also follow us on Twitter and Instagram and all the social medias at FemFreak. The show is engineered by Rob Para. Carrie Stimson provides technical support. Artwork by Jamie Varon, and our intro music is by Phil Circus. Y'all stay safe, stay home, care for your loved ones, and tune in next week for another feminist dive into pop culture.
Later.
Bye.
Bye.